The National Council of Youth and Care Advocates is comprised of advocates with lived experience, youth and care networks, and key allies from across the country. We first convened as a national group in March 2020 to collectively call upon provincial, territorial, and federal governments to issue moratoriums on aging out of care during the pandemic. We continue to work together on longer-term solutions for meaningful child protection systemic change.
Working with the National Council has really given me a space to interact with and connect with people who are like me across the country.
I get to learn about all these different pillars, and it makes me more aware and sensitive to the needs and the struggles of youth in care, and helps me cater my services to them.
My involvement in the council means something bigger than myself. We've all kind of been in the advocacy sphere in different ways.
And working with the council has taught me of the impact that the child welfare system has on young people and families.
As someone who's had care experience myself, the work that's being done is really important. And then as a social worker who works in Indigenous child welfare, it's really important and meaningful for them to have a voice on this council.
That's the whole work of the council, is making sure that young people who leave do so when they're ready and do so with adequate transitions in place and adequate supports.
This was something that was never talked about 20 years ago when I was aging out of care, and to see that not only is there a collective of first voice advocates, but also a collective of allies who don't have that experience, who are championing our governments and our systems and our society to see that young people in and from care, their lives are just as valuable as their own children.
When you are surrounded by other allies and advocates that share similar goals, it ignites this fire in you that keeps you motivated and determined to continue on this work because it's so important.
We get to work with our first advocate peers, we get to be empowered, we get to empower each other and ourselves in order to make sure that we could keep systems and sectors and institutions accountable.
It's given me the tools and the language to be able to communicate a really important issue with child welfare change makers.
To listen and to have the opportunity to hear from people who have lived experience of being in the child welfare system, talk about the changes that need to happen. It's influenced how I see the work that I do in mental health, the importance of supporting young people right from the moment when they're experiencing difficulty, their families, but also throughout their life.
It's not just my voice anymore, but it's like a loud collective voice that, we're using.
What is your name and what is your role in the council?
The Equitable Standards for Transitions to Adulthood for Youth in Care consists of 8 standards across 8 transition to adulthood pillars that governments and service providers across sectors should be held to ensure transitions to adulthood are healthy and supported for youth in care across the country. Our overarching goal is to ensure that youth in care are afforded equitable supports and conditions for success as they grow into adults, so they may thrive and not only struggle to survive.
As we know, we all need a minimum basic income to be able to survive and meet our basic needs. Support for housing, for mental health and well-being, for recreation and social inclusion. It supports young people to not have to choose between finding employment and investing in their education. The financial pillar gives them the structure, the guidance, the knowledge in terms of budgeting, in terms of financial management, in terms of setting themselves up for future, a significant investment into their own well-being that they're not necessarily ready for until they have grown into adults. We need to give them those resources so that they can thrive.
Then we can focus on education and your goals and your emotions. So I think that with financial stability for these youth, they can really blossom.
To me, education has saved my life. I would not be who I am today if I did not go to university, because the more knowledge you gain, the more insights you have, and the stronger voice you have to be able to advocate for your needs. So once you have a diploma or a certificate, no one can really take that away from you, which a lot of young people in care, there's a lot of things taken from them, but that's one thing that can't be taken.
Young people in care graduate at less than half the rate than their peers who aren't in care. Many factors come into play: moving around a lot, changing schools, dealing with trauma and displacement, teachers and school staff not being fully trauma-informed in their approaches, undiagnosed learning disabilities, and so forth. Youth in care need to be provided with all the supports, accommodations, and mentorship that they need to be able to succeed in their education and career trajectories. This means ensuring every young person from care gets to obtain their high school diploma. It also means that any youth in care who wants to pursue post-secondary education and/or professional development opportunities are fully supported to do so. Whether it's a trade certification, first aid or food safety certificates, a bartending course, a college diploma, a university degree at any and all levels. Youth should be supported in pursuing their career interests and dreams even when those don't fit in traditional boxes. I certainly wouldn't be where I'm at today without having the ministry support my undergrad degree and the scholarships and grants that I was fortunate to get for my master's and PhD degrees. When youth in care's education is fully invested in, their potential is endless.
What I do want to point out is the disproportionate amount of young people who fall into the pipelines, into homelessness, trafficking, intimate partner violence, and so on and so forth, the prison system as well. These are all, unfortunately, realities for our young people. And I think that in terms of housing, it's not only about finding a shelter with like 4 walls and a roof over your head, it's also about finding something affordable, something that's safe, where you belong, where in the neighborhood that is safe for you. For our young people, housing is just harder to also access because sometimes 16-year-olds who are accessing housing, sometimes 18-year-olds, and sometimes ageism plays a role in terms of discrimination. When you have housing that meets all the criterias, you are better able to flourish in your life. And therefore you're able to concentrate on education more, you're able to concentrate on employment more. And I think that's such a core need for all people, but especially for our young people who experience discrepancies.
I think relationships in the terms of having that support outside of child welfare for youth aging out of care. In an Indigenous context, it's relationship not just with maybe family, community, it's relationships with elders and knowledge keepers, relationship with the land, relationships with animals. A lot of youth from care end up getting cats and dogs, and that's something that they're able to care for, who can care for them and give them that unconditional love that they often don't get from other places. It's getting away from all of the kind of systemic and more professional way of that people think that we should come to practice in.
That started this long history of these shallow connections with people where a worker would come in and just by reading the file, they thought they knew you.
And the importance of grounding them in relationship, and something that our Youth Advisory Committee talks about quite a bit is relationship-based social work. It's coming to practice as a person, meeting another person and getting to know them, getting to know who they are, what their interests are, sharing some of our interests, and actually building some kind of trusting relationship that can build belonging and a sense of community.
Realize that, folks are here to support each other and that
they should continue to get support and love and resources just as anyone else would.
For me, growing up in care, and my parents were residential school survivors, so I've had that loss of culture and spirituality, and so I'm trying to regain that, I guess, and learn my language and my culture. You know, I can feel it in my bones when I see and hear my culture being expressed, you know, in various ways, and I can feel that yearning.
I didn't even know what First Nation I was from, like who I was like a band member of, until I was almost done high school.
I went to a Catholic school and I went to a Catholic church, but nothing ever felt true for me until I came back to my own native culture.
I sincerely believe that is going to help care providers and policymakers ensure that Indigenous youth are able to receive the support that they need to nurture, build, and maintain those meaningful and reciprocal relationships with their Indigenous communities and cultures.
From the moment that young people come into their lives, that we think about their access throughout their life to mental health services, primary health services that are free, accessible, non-judgmental, gender affirming, culturally competent, and to make sure that young people have what they need to recover from the trauma that they've experienced, but also just be fulfilled and well and healthy.
If you haven't addressed the series of complex traumas that you had to go through living in the child welfare system, if you haven't had the time to actually heal and sit with yourself and see where you're at so you can actually create a plan that makes sense, one of the most important aspects is actually your overall health and your mental health. There's a really serious level of healing that has to be done, and resources that have to be accessible and free for a long time after we transition and while we are in the system.
To be able to advocate for yourself and to be able to stand up for your own rights means that other people can't take advantage of you because you don't know about them.
Having the baseline standard of what youth deserve leaving care so that they know what services they're going to receive upon leaving care, no matter what province they're from, no matter where in Canada they leave care or when they leave care. The baseline of the equitable standards is just that it really infuses equity into the community. And it's really meaningful because it connected me to my community that I know now, and I identify as being from the community as an advocate.
Across Canada, and in fact across the entire world, there is not a readiness-based exit from care. It is based on an arbitrary day, which is either your 18th or your 19th birthday. You may be lucky enough to get an extension that might keep you in there and getting services until 21. But nonetheless, that doesn't match up with the privilege that most folks have when they live within their families. Especially we saw this in COVID, where you could jump back to your family and boomerang in and out. Young people from care don't have that. And when they exit out of care, they often don't have the skills or the person to contact when they need help to learn how to do things like laundry, or should I eat pink chicken? I don't know. And so by looking at these standards, not only are we saying that there is room to grow for young people in terms of their skills to be functioning adults, but here are some very tangible things that the support system around them can do to get them prepared to be successful adults.
We're just starting to realize the particular challenges that are inherent to emerging adulthood. So I really appreciate that the work that we're doing really looks at the specific challenges that are faced by young people who are no longer children and no longer youth, but not exactly fully independent adults yet.
The Equitable Standards Evaluation Model is an accountability and quality assurance tool that provides a step-by-step approach for those who work with young people in and from care to identify the areas in service delivery, support, and policies that are already aligning with each of the 8 equitable standards in the areas that require improvement and further action. A commitment to the implementation of the equitable standards is a commitment first and foremost to youth in and from care, to the ones currently transitioning to adulthood, the ones who are on their way, and the generations of the future. It is a commitment to improving their life trajectories and setting a minimum standard of care and support while striving for excellence in service delivery and supports over time. It truly takes a village to raise not only a child, but also to support youth in their development into a thriving adult. We ask key stakeholders to commit to working better together within and across sectors and to challenge themselves to think outside of systemic boxes to meet young people where they're at. This requires courage, leadership, and a commitment to a significant culture change within the mainstream child welfare system, breaking the status quo and redesigning intervention and support approaches to be truly youth-centered. When we know better, we must do better.
At what age do you think youth in care should exit the system to transition to adulthood? Okay, great. Do you have any last words?
Delicate dance between the opposites, centered on winning. A place where all can feel safe. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, politicians, dentists, flight attendants, pastors, school teachers.